Hello everyone. In today's video what we're going to do is sort of expand upon what we talked about in class where we were discussing how to factor when there are two terms that need to be factored out. I'd like to start by reviewing some of what we know. We know how to factor out a common factor, and this is kind of always what we're going to start by trying to do. So we're always going to try this first. So if I look at these two terms and I say, what do they have in common? So let's start with the numbers. The biggest number that goes into 3 and 6 would be 3. If I look at the x's, the biggest x that I can take out is just one x because he only has one x, the second term. If I have two x's here and one x here, the biggest amount I can take out from both would just be 1. Then I would carefully think about what comes next. So remember, when we're factoring, it's a lot like dividing. We're undoing distributing. So if I divide the 3x squared by 3x, I get 3 divided by 3, which is 1. And there used to be 2 x's here, so I'm taking 1 out, which means there's only 1 x left. Then I would look at the second term. If I divide 6 divided by 3, I get 2. There used to be 1 x here, but I just took it out. So there are no x's left. And my final answer would be 3x parentheses 1x plus 2. Now another thing that I want to review that we know how to do is to multiply two binomials. So when I want to multiply two binomials, I have several options for how to organize my work, but I prefer to organize it in a chart so that I don't lose any of my terms anywhere or can't read my own handwriting. It helps to keep me organized. So I'm going to write the 3x and the plus 1 across the top. And I'm going to write the x and the minus 5 down the side. So this binomial went across the top, and this binomial went down the side. Then I'm going to work on multiplying. So if I multiply, let me see here, 3x times x would give me 3x squared. 1 times x would give me 1 positive 1x. 3x times negative 5 would give me negative 15x. And 1 times negative 5 would give me negative 5. Now what I'm going to do is look for like terms. Now we're lucky that when we organize our work this way, the like terms are always on diagonals from each other. So if I were to simplify this, I would have the 3x squared go first. Then I would combine these like terms. So negative 15x plus 1x would be negative 14x. And then the minus 5 would just drop down and go at the end. Now what we're going to be learning how to do today is to start with this problem and work our way backwards to create these two binomials. So let's take a look at an example where I'm going to kind of walk you through that. The first thing I need you to do in this example is I need you to change this minus 15 to just a minus 5. That was a typo. I apologize. Now I'm going to be referring back to this process quite a bit while I explain how to factor here. And the reason is because we're essentially undoing this process. So we're going to be using this but just going backwards. We're basically starting with this answer and trying to work our way backwards to here. So if we take a look at where this answer came from, the 3x squared and the minus 5 were already in the chart. I didn't change them. I didn't combine anything. I just copied them down directly out of the chart. If I'm trying to go backwards, I'm going to copy them down directly back into the chart in the same spots. So this 3x squared is going to get copied down into the upper left corner, and this -5 is going to be copied down into the lower right corner. And you'll notice that's the same place where those terms were in the original multiplication problem we just did. So all I'm going to do for my first step is fill in the first and the last terms into their appropriate boxes, which you just saw me do. Now the second thing I need to do is figure out what numbers to put here. Now remember, all that I know right now, because I haven't done the multiplication problem every time, is that I have a -14 here. But that -14 was not originally in the chart. Originally, that was a -15 and a +1 that I combined. So in order to figure out what numbers to fill into these two boxes, I'm going to need to do the following process. Underneath here, I'm going to draw a big X, like a crisscross. And in the top of that X, I'm going to put an M, and in the bottom of that X, I'm going to put an A. Now, what those words stand for are multiply and add. Now, what that means is I'm going to know what I want my numbers to multiply to be, and I'm going to know what I want my numbers to add to be. So for example, in this problem, to calculate the number that goes in the multiply spot, I would do the first coefficient times the last coefficient. Here, what that means is that I would do 3 times -5, which would be -15. I'm going to fill that in. To figure out what number I want to have in the add spot, I just look at the middle term. The middle term here would be -14. Now my job is going to be to figure out two numbers that multiply to give me -15 and add to give me -14. So what we're going to do is once again look at factors of 15. If I try to think of numbers that will multiply to give me 15, my answers are 1 and 15 or 3 and 5. Now I'm going to narrow down those options by asking myself which of those numbers will also combine to make 14 when I add them. Well, the only way to make 14 would be to combine the 1 and the 15. And if I want to make -14, I would make the 15 negative. Now, is that okay? Can I just decide to make this negative? Absolutely. If I multiply 1 times -15, I get -15. And if I add 1 plus -15, I get -14. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to write those two numbers here. So I'm going to have a +1 and I'm going to have a -15. Now those two numbers, you'll notice, are the same numbers that were originally in these boxes before I combined them to make -14. So by doing this process, I figured out the coefficients for these two x terms. So I'm now going to fill those in. I'm going to fill in +1x here, and I'm going to fill in -15x here. My last step is going to be now to look for common factors in all the rows and all the columns. So what I did here, where I said, what do they have in common? What can I take out? That's what I'm going to do next. So if I look at this column, the biggest number that goes into 3 and 15 would be 3. And because this guy has an x squared and this guy has an x, I would just put 1x here. The biggest number that goes into 1 and 5 would be +1. And since this guy has an x and this guy doesn't, I can't take out any x's. Then I would look at my rows. The 3x squared and the 1x, the biggest number that goes in is 1, and they both have an x. In the 15 and the -5, since the first number is negative, I'm going to make my answer negative, and the biggest number that goes into 15 and 5 would be 5. They don't both have an x. This guy does and this guy doesn't, so I can't take out an x. Which means my final answer here would be 3x plus 1, parentheses 1x minus 5, which is what we wanted. That's what we originally started with when we were multiplying, and we were just going backwards to figure that out. Now I know that this seems like a very lengthy process. I promise you it will get faster as we do more of them. So let's do a few more right now before we practice for a couple days in class. The first example, I'm going to draw a chart. I'm going to fill in my first, which is 2x squared, and my last, which is positive 3. Now I'm going to work on figuring out my other two terms. So I'm going to make an MA chart. Now to figure out your M, you're going to do the first number times the last number. Which in this problem would give you 6. To figure out your A, you're just going to look at the middle number, which would just be negative 7. Now we're going to make a list of options that multiply to give us 6. So our options would be 1 and 6 or 2 and 3. Of those options, I want to pick the one that will also combine to make negative 7. So in this list of options, I'm going to have to choose the 1 and the 6. Now, in order to make negative 7, I would have to make them both negative. So is that allowed? Am I allowed to do that? Well, absolutely, because negative 1 times negative 6 is still positive 6, and negative 1 plus negative 6 is negative 7. Now I'm just going to fill those numbers in that I decided to use into my MA chart, negative 1 and negative 6. Now those numbers are going to become the numbers that I fill in as the coefficients in these boxes, so negative 1x and negative 6x. Lastly, I'm just going to factor. So if I say, what do these two have in common? I would say 2x. What do these two have in common? I would say 1, and I would make it negative because the first number is negative. Then if I say, what does this row have in common? I would say 1 and x. And if I say, what does this row have in common? I would say 3, and I would make it negative because the first number is negative. So if I were to write my final answer, I would have 2x minus 1, parentheses, 1x minus 3. I'm going to go ahead and skip down to this last problem on this page, problem number 4. We'll save problems 2 and 3. We'll go over those in class before we start practicing. So for problem 4, it looks a little bit different, and that's why I want to make sure to go over this one. What you'll notice is that in this problem, there are only 2 terms. When we've seen that before, we saw that that happened when the middle numbers, the ones that we combined to make 0. So the first thing you're going to want to do here is fill in the middle number is 0t. Just like there was a 7x here, all that happened here was that there were none of them left. They must have canceled. Now I'm going to draw my chart. I'm going to fill in my first, which is 4t squared, and my last term, which is negative 9. Then I'm going to draw a big X, and I'm going to figure out my M and my A. Now my M, I'm going to calculate by doing the first number times the last number. Now the first number times the last number would be negative 36. My A I'm going to calculate by just looking at the middle number, which in this case would be 0. So my list of numbers that multiply to be 36 would be 1 and 36, 2 and 18, 3 and 12, 4 and 9, and 6 and 6. From that list, the only numbers that will combine to make 0 are 6 and 6, but I would need to make one of those 6's negative, and it doesn't matter which one. Now, are you allowed to do that? Well, absolutely. So if you do 6 times negative 6, you would get negative 36. 6 plus negative 6 would be 0. Now I'm going to use those as the coefficients of my middle terms, the ones that I'm combining in the middle of the chart. So now if I fill those in, I'm going to have 6t, this is positive, and negative 6t, that would be negative. Now I'm just going to look for common factors. So what do the 4 and 6 have in common? The answer would be 2. If I say how many t's I can take out, I could only take out 1 because this guy has 2 and this guy has 1. If I say what's the biggest number that goes into 6 and 9, the answer would be 3. And I wouldn't be able to take out any t's because the second term here, the negative 9, doesn't have any. Now if I look at this row, the biggest thing that goes into 4 and 6 would be 2, and I can also take out a t. The biggest thing that goes into negative 6 and negative 9 would be 3, but I would make it negative because the first number here, the leading coefficient, is negative. So I would have 2t plus 3, parentheses 2t minus 3 as my final answer. All right, everybody, thank you so much for watching. I hope that you kind of are starting to get the idea of the series of steps or pattern that we can follow to figure these out. We will definitely do some more examples in class tomorrow, and thank you again. I will see you then.